Morning.
I've got 1 minute. 10:59. How are we doing for turnout? Good morning. It's Monday, August 10th at 11 o'clock. My name is Ron Gaches. I'm the chair of the City of Lawrence Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and we'll call this meeting to order. Diane, do we need to take roll, find out who's here?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if you would do that, and I'll also have some introductory comments for the Zoom meeting today at the conclusion of that, if you will.
Okay. Please verbally identify yourself as here when I call your name. Shannon Oury. Shannon on? We're missing her? Okay. Edith Guffey.
Here.
Susan Cooper. I'm sorry, Susan's no longer on. Patrick Kelly. Christina Gentry.
Here.
Rebecca Buford.
Here.
Susan Waters.
Sarah Waters is here.
I'm sorry, Sarah Waters. I've got a Sarah Waters here. There's no Susan Waters here. All right, Erica Zimmerman.
Here.
Dana Ortiz.
Here.
Thomas Howe.
Present.
Monte Soukup.
Here.
Paul Newsom.
Here.
And myself, Ron Gaches. And I'm sorry, and Cole
Brown.
Cole Brown.
Here.
Very good. Thank you, Cole.
And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to tell you all something. Last week was our primaries, and I ran for another term in Precinct 14 committeeman, and I got re-elected.
Very good. Congratulations, Cole.
And about 298 people around the state of Kansas and Lawrence voted for me.
Very good. That's wonderful news. Diane, I think you had some comments about our Zoom format.
Yes, Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and public access channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found in the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. And once you're muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute it when you speak. And in some cases, I might mute or unmute people as needed during the meeting so we can hear. Each time you speak, please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening. So that's very important. Each time you speak, just wanted to remind everyone on the call of that need to do that in this format. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon. And for the purposes of this meeting, please keep your video on when you're participating in the meeting. If you're participating by phone, and I don't think that we have anyone participating by phone today, but if you happen to join with the phone, you can click *6 to mute and unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on the screen, you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker, and gallery view tiles all of the meeting participants. And Mr. Chair, I'd just also like to recommend, note that it would be important if you make motions at today's meeting, if you can restate the motion prior to the vote, and then at the end of the vote, if you would announce the the results of the vote. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question, Diane. We have 4 views here, which are City Hall views, but no identification of who is behind those. Can you tell us who City Hall, CC Projector, City Dell, and Farmer Dell are, please?
Yes, so thank you very much for asking that, Thomas. Those, and this is Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Those are all related to our video technician that is doing all the video work behind this to broadcast it both on the city channel and out onto YouTube. They're not actually active participants in the meeting.
Very good. Any other questions for Diane? This is Ron Gaches again, AHAB Chair. The next item on our agenda is to approve the minutes of the July 13th meeting. The Chair would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion by Thomas. Do we have a second?
Aye.
Second.
A second from Rebecca. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Aye.
sorry. I'm sorry. I need to go through the roll call. I apologize. Ron Gaches, AHAB Chair here. Edith Guffey.
Aye.
Christina Gentry.
Christina Gentry says aye.
Gentry, excuse me.
That's okay.
Rebecca Buford.
Aye.
Sarah Walters.
Sarah Waters. And I'm going to actually abstain because I was absent, so I'm not sure that those are accurate minutes, and I didn't review the video. So.
Okay, yes, we have you as absent, Sarah. Thank you. Erica Zimmerman.
Aye.
Dana Ortiz.
Aye.
Thomas Howe.
Yes.
Monte Soukup.
Aye.
Paul Newsom. Is Paul present? No. Cole Brown.
Aye.
Sorry. Aye.
Did we just have someone jump in on top of Cole?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted. I said aye. Paul says aye.
Oh, thank you, Paul. And Ron Gaches, aye. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have 10 in support, 1 abstention, and no opposed.
This is Patrick Kelly. I abstain. Not that
Patrick-
I'm feeling left out.
Okay, 2 abstentions, sorry.
And Chairman Gaches, I believe that Shannon Ortiz has joined us. I'm sorry.
Very good. Shannon, good to see you. Allery. So to recap, we had 9 votes in support and 2 abstentions and no opposition. Motion to approve the minutes is approved. Next item on the agenda is to review and provide recommendation to the Planning Commission on text amendment TA 200002. Consider text amendment to the Land Development Code to help reduce cost of housing by 5%, City of Lawrence, initiated by the City Commission on February 6, 2020. And I believe we've got a staff report.
Good evening, or excuse me, good morning. Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. Kyle Kobe, who had brought this to you before, is currently on vacation, so I will kind of step in and fill in for him a little bit here. This amendment was brought to you back in May. It kind of goes through some of the details. We've also attached a memo going through some of the requests and items that were noted at your May meeting to kind of follow up on that one. Just to kind of also let you know, I've got some other details and talking points I can share with you all, but most of it is in the memo that we have there. We also have on the call this morning multiple members of the Municipal Services and Operations Department on the call here. Andy Inns with our engineering team, David Cronin, the city engineer, and Melinda Harger, who's our assistant director, are also here to kind of go through some of the details for downstream sanitary sewer, a 7-step traffic study, and sidewalks and those details, since they mainly fall in the purview of municipal services and operations, and planning and development services just kind of makes the linkage occur with development. So we have quite a number of expertise on the call here to go through it. Just wanted to kind of share some details as based in the memo there. We looked at a variety of different street tree factors.
Jeff, Ron Gaches, AHAB Chair, I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment. We have another item on the agenda this morning that I know is going to take quite a bit of time. I do hope, I would expect that all of the advisory board members have reviewed the memo prior to the meeting, and I'd like to leave an ample amount of time for questions of yourself and the representative of the home builders. So I'm going to ask both parties not to review in exhaustive detail your materials, but instead hit on the what you think are the key points that the advisory board should be informed of. And I will say the memo does an exhaustive and complete job of defending the use of sidewalks. I don't think there's any really question about that. But I'm looking to get to some of the specific issues regarding the proposals from the home builders. So please proceed.
Certainly. Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. Certainly, Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to kind of be very brief in those. We'll just say, like I was mentioning, the memo does cover the items related to the street trees and the various studies, and it does research other communities in there. I will let the memo kind of stand on its own in that regard. And like I mentioned earlier, we do have quite a team of people that work on our MSO side of things available. So if you have questions about specific items related to those, we do have the expertise on the call to help address those items.
I'm sorry, I don't understand 3-letter acronyms. What is an MSO, please?
MSO is the acronym for Municipal Services and Operations, which is basically the city's version of Public Works.
Thank you.
But our team is available on that one, and be happy to kind of hold my comments there to reserve time for questions and other items, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
We're staff is good. If you'd like to proceed, that's by all means.
I'm not wanting to proceed. I thought that there would be. I'm expecting a staff summary of the memo. What's the preference from board members? I didn't intend for my comments earlier to shut you down, Jeff. I didn't intend that. What's the desires of board members? Would you like to have a more detailed review of the memo, or do you have questions for Jeff and the team?
This is Christina Gentry, a resident receiving housing assistance. I appreciate all of the information that we received about the trees and the sidewalks. I only have a question about who are we contracting the trees from? If we have that information, I would like to know who would get those trees from. And if we don't have that information, I'd just kind of like to pick out. There's a place here at Lawrence that is Community Orchard. Maybe we can look into partnering with in that area.
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. It was a question, who do we procure our trees from? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Our trees are usually procured by our Parks and Recreation Department based upon their agreements that they have and a bidding process that you get every year. I don't know the specifics related to those details in the bid on that one, unfortunately.
This is Christina Gentry. Thank you.
Jeff, I've got a specific question. There's some discussion in the memo, and I know at prior meetings about the requirement for when sidewalks need to be built in an area. Could you briefly recap if there's a new development going in, at what time are sidewalks required to be installed for that new development?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. I would probably also have David Cronin speak to this one a little bit too, but the sidewalks are usually required to go in at the time that the infrastructure for goes in. So it'd be the same as when we put in the underground infrastructure, the streets, the curb and gutter, and those other details. That is when sidewalks would be expected to go in.
Okay. Did you, I believe there was a discussion of some sort with the Lawrence Home Builder Association. Did you ask them at what frequency do builders have to replace sidewalks that have been put in as a result of damage during home construction?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Bobby Flory and I did talk about that one. I don't really have hard and fast data. There's kind of you get an idea from talking to our contractors in the community about when that frequently tends to happen. Also talked a little bit with our Municipal Services and Operation Department about the frequency at which they saw that kind of happening. And feel free, Bobby, or also MSO, to correct me if I kind of wander here, but I think we both kind of seen the item. It does happen on job sites. It's just a nature of construction, and it can be more or less prevalent on certain sites depending upon the activity that's going on in the whole and those kind of details. But also, we don't want to speak for either Bobby or MSO in those regards if I happen to have it a little bit wrong this morning.
I like to say so.
I have a follow-up question then for Serena. Does the current policy provide any flexibility to the developer on when that sidewalk can go in? You indicated that the frequency of damage to the sidewalk depends on a number of variables that are, I guess, unique to the site or to the development that are going in. Does current policy provide any flexibility in recognizing those variables and allowing the developer any leeway in when sidewalks need to be originally installed?
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. I would say for the most part, it does not provide a lot of flexibility. Sidewalks are included in our public improvement plan for subdivisions, and they are constructed and inspected and approved by our Municipal Services and Operations Department prior to accepting the public improvements. And then they're essentially turned over to the developer or lot owner for maintenance. And we have a 1-year warranty on our public improvements and infrastructure. So within that 1 year, it would still, if there was any damage done or a sidewalk that was broken, not by others, it would be not by other contractors, it would be the responsibility of the general contractor that constructed the sidewalk to replace it. So that's just a little outline of how we install and inspect the sidewalks currently, but does not have a lot of flexibility for installing them at a later date.
Okay, it's my observation from the staff memo and from information provided by the home builders letter that this particular issue of when sidewalks have to be installed appears to be the one where Lawrence requirements are quite a bit more rigorous and distinct from that of our surrounding communities. Just an observation. I believe someone else had a question. Edith, I saw your hand, I think.
Yes, Edith Guffey, member at large. And my question is this. How much is this impacting the affordability of housing? If we look at this from the equity perspective, how much is this impacting affordability of housing for low income and persons of color? I mean, if we begin to look at these kinds of policies from that perspective, what is the impact that this policy is having on? I mean, there are a lot of details here, and I'm not a professional here, but I'm wondering what's the impact?
Would someone from the home builders like to respond to that question?
This is Paul Newsom with the Lawrence Home Builders.
Yes, Paul.
I can just tell you from my experience on my projects, specific to sidewalks, at the beginning of every project, I plug in $1,000 for sidewalk repair, sidewalk replacement. And that doesn't always get used. And sometimes it takes more than that. But as a general number, a general allowance, I put in $1,000 for every one of my projects for sidewalk repair. If the process had some flexibility where it could change, I could pull that $1,000 out of my initial estimates, and it wouldn't be something that I, quote unquote, pocketed. But that's just, generally speaking, that's what I do on my projects.
Monte, Soukup, AHAB, affordable housing, or justice matters. Sorry, on too many committees. To me, it makes some sense from a constructability standpoint to have a code that provides the general contractor some flexibility, as long as that sidewalk's in place when the home gets a, occupancy permit, and you can provide some continuity for skipped lots. I can see requiring, if a builder's skipping over a lot, maybe they have to put in that to have a contiguous sidewalk if another home is occupied. But outside of that, I don't see why that has to go in with the infrastructure piece. I get why city staff would want that, because it certainly would help with their inspection process and all that. But that's not our goal. Our goal is affordable housing and contiguous sidewalks for the community. So as long as we're meeting those criteria, I don't know why we wouldn't allow the builders the flexibility to put that in when they see it most economical for the project, because that's going to get us to our goal of affordability.
I noticed something in my neighborhood on sidewalks. We have a sidewalk right in front of our mailbox, and one of the sidewalks, and this is Cole Brown, by the way, is that one of the sidewalks is like sinking low for so many years, and nobody has come from the city to look at that. And it's a death trap right there, like for winter or when people are walking on it or using their bike. I'm a little concerned about that people might trip over the sidewalk and hurt themselves, or slip on the ice and hurt themselves. Nobody from the city has looked at that. And I spoke up about something else yesterday on affordable housing at the Reserve Apartments across the street from where I live. There's no stop sign where cars don't even bother to look, and I told them, you guys need to start calling the city of Lawrence and tell them to put a stop sign right there to make it safer.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Cole. Yes, Tom?
Thomas Howe, Lawrence Board of Realtors representative for the affordable housing. And I'd like to address Edith's specific question, because what she said was, what does this have to do with affordable housing for other constituencies? And I think that the answer has to do with the fact that this is one of the 1,000 cuts. This is one of the items in building new homes that raise the price of those homes. And anytime you have the price of housing stock go up as they're newly constructed, it means the values of lower priced houses go up. It means that the lowest price houses also move out of that affordability range. And so the phrase that we use is the death by 1,000 cuts. This is just one of those cuts.
Other questions or comments? Ron Gaches, AHAB Chair. Other questions or comments for Jeff or members of his team regarding staff memo?
Ron, this is Monte.
Yes, Monte.
I don't have a question for the staff. I guess I'm listening to the conversation and nothing has drawn it back to we're providing a recommendation to city staff for changes to this text amendment. Is that what we're doing at this point?
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. The ask before the AHAB this morning is to provide a recommendation and guidance to the Planning Commission as they consider the text amendment as it goes forward along its way here. So it's really to provide recommendation or comment on it as it moves along its way there. And if I may, Mr. Chair, I'm also know Bobby Flores on the call this morning, and I think she'd probably like to provide some more detail and information that would be available. So I don't want to lose that in the transition this morning.
Okay.
Yes.
Just Monte, Soukup, Justice Matters. I guess then I can't speak for the committee, but my personal recommendation is that we find a way for the code to provide flexibility for the developer to build the sidewalks when they should be built in the most efficient way possible to reduce the cost, but yet be there when the building gets occupancy permit and some other way through code, figure out how to provide that continuity to other sidewalks so we don't have gaps in the sidewalks at the same time. The second thing I would recommend is that the tree requirement go to the greater distancing so we have a few less street trees. We have a beautiful city of trees, but 50-foot spacing, that's not very far apart for trees. When a tree reaches maturity, that's just not that's like a canopy spacing for trees. So I think that could go to 50 or 60 even on streetscape. You have a minimum, lot frontages. So, that's in the, I probably got this wrong, but I'm guessing that's in the 65-foot range for minimum lot distance, except for a few very exceptional lots, which we're not really even platting anymore, which would be, R3s and whatnot. But so I suggest that we increase the tree spacing to also reduce the cost. And I think the other things they were recommending that we go ahead and do those other cost saving measures. So all of those, if we reduce the cost of a lot by a couple $1,000s, it's a couple $1,000s we reduce the cost of a lot
by. Monte, for the purposes of consideration by the advisory board, I'd like to divide your recommendation into two parts. The first part dealing with sidewalks and the second part dealing with tree requirement. And the chair asks if there's a second for either of those or both of those proposals.
I'll second both of those proposals.
Thank you, Rebecca. So motion by Monte and second by Rebecca.
I third.
Yes, other consideration. Yes, Cole.
Yes.
Excuse me, Cole. Did you have a comment on this item?
I like the sidewalk idea, getting it fixed and having the trees fixed a little bit better. Because I've seen trees like covering up stop signs and people can't see that.
This is Edith, Edith Guppy. The only thing, my only slight concern about this is that there be, and I don't know how you do this, except to go on record by saying, I'm looking for a balance between quality of life and cost, so that cost is really important, but so sidewalks are important too, and our trees, so that we don't, we have to trust that the builders will say, not cut it down to the bone, but that we'll look for a balance here. And so by doing these, we're looking for a balance.
Mr. Chairman, this is Bobby Flory from the Lawrence Home Builders Association. I wasn't sure.
Bobby, would you like to provide a summary of the comments you folks had submitted then?
Yes, I didn't know. I was waiting for the appropriate time for that, but I didn't expect the motion to be made. So if it's before I had a chance to do that. So I appreciate that. But if I could just kind of hit on a couple of things before you move forward. And I won't reiterate everything that is in our memo. However, I would like to point out that we feel that every single regulation that is unnecessary is an unnecessary cost and part of the overall picture, the cumulative picture that adds to the cost of housing. Regarding the street trees, 50 foot, I think is helpful. Another big factor that would, I think, make a nice difference in cost savings is reducing the caliper from 2 inch to 1.5 inch, just requiring a smaller tree. It sounds like a little thing, but from the landscape folks that I've spoken to, that there is a price break at that point, going to a 1.5 inch tree, and eventually over time it will grow up. We love trees too. Nobody's trying to get down to the bare minimum, but we're, as the goal of your committee, it is to find ways for affordable housing. So we're not suggesting that it be eliminated, but I did list out a lot of options. We were not suggesting in this that all those options be included, but hey, these are just some ways, and that going from 2 to 1.5 is another way that might be helpful. And I don't know if you wanted to take one topic at a time, Mr. Chairman, or if you wanted to, you want me to keep going?
I think comments that are specifically pertinent to the sidewalk and tree issue would be appropriate.
Okay, and the sidewalk issue too. Would agree that sidewalks are very important to the community. The timing of it seems to be what I'm hearing the conversation about the most, and yeah, that's really not. I mean, I think it would be better if it would be more efficient for the builder if they could put the sidewalks in as the houses are built. I think that probably would work, but I think what would make a tremendous savings is going to one side of the street, and the majority of the communities that I checked with did have sidewalks required on one side of the street. That still allows pedestrian traffic, but that's a big cost. That's a significant cost. So, and going from 5 foot to 4 foot, you still have a sidewalk that more than meets the standards, the ADA standards, but it still allows for traffic. But those are things that have an impact on the overall affordability and the cost. We have a history with the sidewalk replacement, and that is several years ago, if the sidewalks were not pristine, they were being required to be replaced. And then we worked with, at that time, Public Works Department, and they finally said, okay, we think new construction needs to be held to the same standards as everybody else, which is a 1/2 inch displacement. But I think Paul would agree, the builders, that wouldn't be acceptable for them to have a brand new house with a 1/2 foot, 1/2 inch displacement. They would, that's something they would fix whether the city required it or not. But so they went to that standard, or they enforced that standard, and now it's my understanding that we're back to having this being expected to have pristine sidewalks. And by pristine, even if they have surface cracks, they're being asked to be replaced. Cosmetic cracking that's not structural is being replaced at times. And so that's where Paul has talked about, he just plugs in that number. So I put that in my memo, just an acknowledgement that by city staff, that surface cracks are not shrinkage cracks, are not structural cracks. So I think there's some significant savings in the sidewalks if we could go to 4 foot sidewalks and or do one side of the road. I feel like that would still support good pedestrian traffic.
Any questions from the board? Ron Gaches, AHAB Chair. Any questions from the board for Bobby?
Well, Rebecca Buford with Tenants to Homeowners. Bobby, when we say going to one side of the road on sidewalks, clarify, you're talking about non-arterial streets, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important too. I completely agree with that a little cul-de-sac that has very little movement or walkability. I mean, one side is plenty for a residential street like that, where two sides are important for 19th Street or Haskell, main arterial roads. So there is a distinction there. And I think that's when everyone understands that, that's really helpful in being, again, that what Edith talked about, this balance of connectivity and sidewalks.
Bobby Flory here with the Lawrence Home Builders Association. Thank you, Rebecca. That's exactly what I meant. I'm talking about local streets.
I agree with you.
Thank you for that clarification. Other questions for Bobby?
No, this is Monte, Soukup, Justice Matters. I think, I'm kind of, I don't have an issue with the one side if that's where the group goes. I like the idea of the 4-foot sidewalk. When you think about, if it were one or the other, I would go 4 foot on both sides, but I can go either way. But I like the idea of 4 foot. 5-foot sidewalk is basically a product of ADA. So you have passing capacity. And in a residential street, you have basically a driveway well within the distance required between passing zones. So I'm not sure why we necessarily need a 5-foot sidewalk. It not only saves you upfront costs, it saves the person that's having to shovel it by city requirement from having to shovel an extra foot. And it's cheaper to replace when you get to that point of having to do, some kind of replacement. And it just, to me, 4 foot feels more residential. A 5-foot sidewalk feels like you're on the KU campus or somewhere where you're trying to carry larger loads of traffic. And maybe 5 foot's okay for arterial. Again, maybe you go to 5 foot on arterial and 4 foot in the neighborhoods to create that scale. I think those are all things we should certainly explore and certainly are cost reducing. And so anyway, that's all.
I like what you're trying. I agree what you're saying from the neighborhood association. I live on Crestline Drive, and across the street, there's other townhouses that don't have enough sidewalks to get to their properties. So I think it would be beneficial to put sidewalks through the grass to get to their side of the neighborhood. So I agree with you from the neighborhood association. And I would like to work with you on that project. Thank you.
Cool. Other comments from the board or questions from the board?
Chair, this is Patrick Kelly. I have a question about 4-foot sidewalks since Monte brought it up and Bobby brought it up. And one of the things in Bobby's memo about the requirements is that you have to have a passing space every, 200 feet, Bobby? I think that's right. And I'm just interested, if we did go to 4 feet, how do we decide whose responsible for the extra passing space? Am I understanding that incorrectly?
This is Monte, Justice Matters. Patrick, I think a driveway where the sidewalk intersects a driveway would serve as your passing area. It doesn't take a very big area, and Dave Cronin could probably tell you exactly the length it takes to have a passing zone. But I think if you have a driveway, every 200 feet, you're probably going to meet that requirement. And if you didn't, you could certainly create a 5-foot passing zone that's done. And you've probably seen there like wide places and sidewalks in certain places, and that's exactly what those are.
Yeah, that was sort of my question was, I understood the part about the driveways, but when you decide that there's a 5-foot passing zone, who determines who gets to pay for the passing zone?
What? It's
Bobby
probably just,
Flory, Lawrence Home Builders Association. I'm sorry, I have an unstable internet connection and I lost about 2 minutes of that conversation. So if there was a question asked regarding that, I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
it's Monte, Soukup, Justice Matters. I think that, you know, from the city, when they do the site plan, the city would ultimately be responsible for reviewing and determining where those passing zones would occur or where they would need extra ones. And that would just fall wherever it falls to meet that code requirement, I would think. And it would become incumbent upon that specific lot. But we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 panels of a sidewalk. I'm not quite sure exactly how long those zones are, but it's not like the whole length of the lot would have to be 5 foot. It would just be a 2 or 3 panel section.
Paul Newsom, Lawrence Home Builders. So in theory, if we ran into a scenario where driveways wouldn't work for turnaround or passing, potentially you could use this areas for the mailbox pads, where you could potentially widen those areas or flare them out to give that extra width. That might be an opportunity.
Ron Gaches, AHAB chair. Yeah, Jeff, I had a question for you. You go right ahead, though.
I'm going to look to Dave Cronin to jump in here and give me a hand on this one, but I believe there are some very strict federal requirements around those passing zones and when they have to occur. And the only fear that I would have of using a driveway for that is that the driveways would not meet the cross slope requirements set by the federal rules to qualify as a passing zone. The other part of that is we'd also potentially be encouraging people to trespass into other people's driveways and make that passing zone in there. I'm not sure that's something we'd want to necessarily encourage depending upon the width of the driveways and the proximity of the houses to the streets. But those are the two things that kind of pop up to me as we're talking about this, is we'd have to watch the cross slopes on driveways to qualify and see if that meets those items, and also make sure that we have enough space between the property line and the sidewalk at that point to then not encourage that trespassing up someone's driveway that may not want that to be an item. So David, feel free to jump in if I've got my things backwards.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. Yeah, I would echo all of Jeff's comments. Driveway approaches a lot of times are steeper than 2% cross slopes, so we would have challenges unless you did a lot of due diligence and planning to ensure we would have a passing area within a driveway where you could have this sidewalk in the driveway wider than 4 feet. And then, you know, up front when we're in subdivision design, we don't always know exactly where driveways are going to be located. So there could certainly be situations where the spacing is more than 200 feet. But I don't have all my ADA notes in front of me, but I believe it's a 5x5 area every 200 feet is the length and the width. So, but yeah, it would take a lot more planning up front and to decide, I guess, where those passing zones would be.
Paul Newsom, Lawrence Home Builders. What about the sidewalk width at the driveway being 5 foot, and in the grassy areas it's 4 foot? So we eliminate cross slope concerns at the driveway. We would not be encouraging people to get on people's driveways. We'd still be within the sidewalk. That might be an option.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. That would be an option. The challenge is deciding whose driveway is 5 feet, and that would be something that would need to be decided during the planning stage. It would just be complicated to decide that, I guess. But that's, I guess, a possibility.
This is Monte, so Justice Matters. I think if you're already planning for a 5 foot sidewalk, you've already created that. So why just don't change the grading plan and the requirement for a 5 foot wide level path for the 4 foot sidewalk to lay on? And then when it gets to the driveway, it's already graded and it has to fit. Because if your sidewalk's crossing the driveway at 5 foot right now, you can't create that cross slope on the driveway, or your sidewalk's not compliant. So I don't think that's too big of an issue. That's certainly a workable situation, in my opinion.
Chair is going to exercise authority to restrict comments to the two motions that are currently on the table, and we're going to consider the first one regarding sidewalk flexibility first. Do we have any other comments from board members, comments or questions in regard to the first proposal, first motion? And Monte, I'm going to need your help with capturing this correctly, but what I've got down in my notes is find a way for the code to provide developers with flexibility to complete sidewalks by the time a home is occupied and provide for continuation between occupied homes through vacant lots. Is that close to capturing what you intended?
Yeah, I would say the only little bit of clarification is a occupancy permit, not the house occupied.
Very good catch.
That's a timeline for the city to have the chance to sign off or not.
So before the occupancy permit is issued.
Yeah.
Before occupancy permit issued. Find a way for the code to provide developers with flexibility to complete sidewalks before the occupancy permit is issued and provide for continuation of sidewalks between occupied homes through any vacant lots. Any further clarification needed on the current motion? Is there any further discussion or questions about the current motion? I'll initiate a call of the roll. Paul Newsom, please respond verbally with a yes or no if you're in support or opposed to the motion. Monte, Soukup?
Soukup, like a sponge.
Soukup, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. Thomas Howe?
Yes.
Dana Ortiz?
Yes.
Erica Zimmerman?
Yes.
Sarah Waters?
Yes.
Rebecca Buford?
Yes.
Christina Gentry? Gentry?
Gentry, yes.
Gosh. Patrick Kelly?
Yes.
Edith Guffey?
Yes.
Cole Brown?
Yes.
Shannon Oury?
Yes.
And Ron Gaches, yes. And have I missed anyone? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Chair counts 13 votes in support and no votes in opposition. Motion is approved. Monte, would you like to restate your second motion regarding the tree requirement?
The Monte Soukup Justice Matters. I guess I would recommend that the Planning Commission just consider adjusting the tree spacing up from where it currently is to reduce the number of trees required. That creates a balance between the neighborhood and the number of trees and the costs.
Okay, I'm having some difficulty keeping up with you. Recommend Planning Commission adjust the tree spacing requirement from the current 40 foot
Up
to,
up to a greater distance that still maintains quality, of the neighborhood and the number of trees, but still reduces the cost to the development. That would be the end of the motion, but the intent there is to have them and the staff decide what that is, but we think 40 is too low. It needs to go up a little bit, but yet still create that balance that Edith talked about.
okay.
Mr. Chair, hold on.
Please go right ahead.
This is Sarah Waters with the University of Kansas. Monte, would you also be willing to put in yours to also consider changing the trunk size from 2 to 1.5 inches? I believe that was talked about as another cost savings measure that kind of goes with the distancing as well as tree size.
Yes, and Monte Soukup Justice Matters, and evaluating the current caliper requirement to reduce it from 2 inches to 1.5.
Is the second of the original motion in concurrence with the proposed amendment to the motion?
I second the amendment.
Okay, the motion before us has been amended, and what I've got right now is to recommend to the Planning Commission adjusting the tree spacing requirement from the current 50-foot requirement up to a greater distance that maintains quality of the neighborhood and still reduces cost of a new lot.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes?
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services. It would be, the current standard would be 40 feet going upwards, not 50 feet going upwards.
Excuse me, I misspoke. I've actually had it written down correctly, but I can't pronounce names today, and I'm not doing a very good job reading my own numbers either.
That's Monte Soukup Justice Matters. Also, you need to add the part about consider adjusting the caliper of the tree.
And evaluate the current caliber requirement from 2 inch to possibly reducing it to 1.5 inch. Any questions or comments regarding the motion before us? Seeing none, Chair will begin a roll call vote. And let's begin this time with Erica Zimmerman. Please respond verbally yes or no if you're in support of the motion as amended. Erica?
Yes.
Pardon me?
Yes.
Yes? I'm sorry, thank you. Dana Ortiz?
Yes.
Thomas Howe?
In favor, yes.
Monte Soukup?
Yes.
Paul Newsom?
Yes.
Cole Brown?
Yes.
Shannon Oury?
Yes.
Edith Guffey?
Yes.
Patrick Kelly?
Yes.
Christina Gentry?
Gentry. That's okay. We'll get it right. Yes, I say yes.
I've marked the G in your name so many different ways that I've got myself just completely confused now. Rebecca Buford?
Yes.
And Sarah Waters?
Yes.
And Ron Gaches? Yes. Did I miss anyone? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Chair records a vote of 13-0 in support of the motion. I've lost my agenda.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Long term, how will we know that this mattered, that this made a difference in the cost?
Boy, that's an excellent question. Well, let me put that question. Paul, can you help us answer that question, or Bobby?
My response is anything, we should be trying to do everything we can to regulatory wise to reduce unnecessary regulation. It would be very difficult to tell because there are so many different variables in the cost of the house. For example, right now the lumber price is going off the charts. That is something that just since May has really gotten, that's the latest thing now with materials is the lumber cost. So when you look at the end cost of a home to know, okay, did we see a $1,000 reduction in the cost of that house? It's going to be very difficult to tell, but I can tell you if we don't do anything, if you don't make any efforts to reduce these regulations, the cost of housing will continue to rise.
Paul Newsom, North Home Builders. So specific to the trees, if we reduced the spacing of trees, reduced the size of trees, that should be reflected in the tree fees that are in our building permit. So we would see a reduction. I would expect to see some kind of reduction in our tree fees and our building permits that we purchase. And if the sidewalk process changed, I know my process would eliminate an allowance of $1,000 in anticipation of potential sidewalk repair. So ultimately, you might not see a huge, it's just going to be what I would hope to be kind of a lowering of all standards a little bit altogether instead of one big chunk here or one big chunk here. I think we have to look at across the board, just kind of reducing everything a little bit. And that would be our biggest notice of a difference.
Edith, Ron Gaches, AHAB chair here. I would have a little bit of a different answer to that question. And what we heard from Bobby is everyone expects the cost of housing to continue to go up. What I'm particularly interested in myself is the gap of the premium that is charged in Lawrence for a new home as comparison to surrounding areas. And what I would hope is that over time, we are able to put policies into place that closes that gap. I think long term that would be reflective of us putting policies into place that encourage more affordable housing. I think, as many folks have pointed out, all of these issues, sidewalk width, number of trees, continuity of sidewalks, drainage issues, all of these represent some measure of a quality of life priority, kind of crashing into a cost of a new home priority. And I don't think of us as reducing standards, but modifying the standard to give greater priority to the regulatory imposed cost of the lot. But I don't think we're going to be able to, in 18 months, point to any specific reductions in the price of homes and say, well, that's because we're only building sidewalks now on one side of the street instead of two sides of the street in new subdivisions. I don't think we're going to have any new subdivisions in the next 18 months. So we probably won't even see these policies put into place right away. That's assuming that the Planning Commission thinks any of them are worthy and decides to forward them along. But ultimately, if we can't make some kind of an improvement, then we're just kind of talking about issues that maybe, as you've suggested earlier, might not be the most significant thing for us to spend our time on. Other questions or comments? We've addressed two issues, specific issues, in an hour of consideration, and I'm aware that we have an important discussion yet to occur. How would folks like to proceed further now or in some future time with the issues associated with the recommendations from the home builders on how to reduce cost of new housing? How would the board like to proceed on this issue?
This is Monte, Soukup, Justice Matters. I will take a stab at that, Ron. I look at the other issues that were considered, and most of them are very technical and don't impact quality of life from affordable housing. So I guess I would recommend that, the plan, we would, we make a recommendation. I don't want to put this in a motion yet, but I would think we'd make a recommendation that the Planning Commission consider anything that reduces the cost, which is to the benefit of this board, but that does not compromise public safety or quality of the development. We'd be in favor of those cost things. I don't think I look at these other issues like pipe insulation and the duct drawings. I don't see that this board needs to weigh in on the quality of that. If it reduces the cost, we would be in favor of it. But I don't think we need to have a big discussion unless someone sees something in there that I'm not seeing. I'm certainly open to listen to that.
Other comments from board members?
While it's not a specific recommendation or motion, I think that if we were to focus on the fact that all of these costs, as they accrue, raise the price of housing in our city. And so if the Planning Commission is cognizant of each of these little things or larger things which raise those costs, and make sure that they are absolutely critical before they put them in place, or they have a review panel that looks at what is existing, that will help in the big picture reduce or increase the affordability of housing in our city.
Other comments from board members? Do the comments from Tom and Monte represent consensus of the board, or are there differing opinions? Silence.
Well, I mean, of course.
Let me do this. By just a show of hands, are we moving in the right direction in asking the Planning Commission to consider these issues? If you think that's the right direction, please give me a thumbs up. If you think it's the wrong direction, give me a thumbs down. I see several thumbs up. Diane, can we ask the Planning Commission to give the cost issues more consideration as they make adjustments in their code requirements without the adoption of a specific motion? Can that be reflected in the minutes as a consensus of the advisory board?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. First, I think one of the things I would clarify is that this board is really making its recommendations to the City Commission ultimately. The Planning Commission will be considering these items as well on their way to the City Commission, but the City Commission would be making any final action as it relates to changes in city code. So if the board wishes to do so, it could pass a general motion of recommendation to the City Commission that additional technical items, as I think that they were referred to in the staff report, that you all are recommending a closer look at those, and that the board is favorable toward anything that would add to a reduction of costs for housing.
Chair would entertain a motion that captures Diane's comments.
I would make such a motion.
We have a motion from Thomas Howe. Is there a second?
I second.
Second from Shannon Oury.
Mr. Chair, I just have a short comment before we vote, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely, Patrick.
This is Patrick Kelly, Douglas County Commission. I think I'm going to vote for this, but I tell you, it seems like a no-brainer to me that we would be against raising the cost of housing. I think this is a little bit problematic in that we're an advisory board to an advisory board to the city commission. I worry about the decision-making process here a little bit, and that this has been sent so far down the line. And then we're like, well, we don't, I'm almost sort of naming the elephant in the room. Well, we don't know what to do with this. So we're against anything that increases the cost of housing rather than make some of these technical decisions. And I just want us to think a little bit about when we bring these things down to Affordable Housing Advisory Board, is that really the best way to do this? I mean, we all have opinions on it, but I think this is really the Planning Commission's advisory to make, because it's a change of code, and adding the affordable housing to it, I think just is making these things really, really complicated, and it's not moving us forward fast enough. So those are just some thoughts I had.
Mr. Chair, Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager, if I might just add maybe a point of clarification that helps with that a little bit. So when the staff report ultimately goes to the City Commission after the Planning Commission has a chance to weigh in on it, all of the advice from any and all of the advisory boards that work with the City Commission, their recommendations would be part of all of that viewpoint. And sometimes, as Mr. Kelly has stated, sometimes, different boards have different roles or different views on these things, and that's completely appropriate for each of them to make their comments, and, ultimately the commission would make the decisions. So hopefully that might provide some clarification.
Thank you, Diane. Patrick, I appreciate your comments. I think this issue has tumbled down to the bottom of the hill. And no one has wanted to sit down and spend much time talking about these issues the last couple of years, except maybe me. And I look across my Zoom page here at the frustrated faces on the board, and I know that we've got more important work to do. It's frustrating to me that we don't have within the city any component part that seems to be vigorously advocating on behalf of reducing the cost of housing, new housing, and within the city, most of our inertia seems to be in support of what's already in place. And as I look at the opportunities to impact the cost of housing with policy, as opposed to just subsidizing housing, whether it's new builds or rental occupancy, as I look at trying to move the needle on the cost of housing, the city regulation plays probably only a small part. The larger issues have to do with availability of inventory. Why do homes cost more in Lawrence? Well, we don't have much inventory compared to Topeka. We don't even have much inventory compared to some of the small communities around us. And that drives up the cost of all housing. So, I'm trying to work where I can see an opportunity at what are probably just the margins of the cost of new housing in a hope that I'll live long enough to see it all trickle down and impact the overall marketplace. But it doesn't seem that there are many other component parts of the city that have reducing the cost of new builds as any kind of a priority. It's simply up to the marketplace to decide what that should be. And in the meantime, we've got a number of quality of life considerations that we've put into policy. That's led me to quite a level of frustration to see that we haven't had a serious debate take place on what I thought were some legitimate and thoughtful recommendations from the home builders. But I think we've probably exhausted this, at least for the short term.
Mr. Chairman, in the memo from the Home Builders Association.
Excuse me, Bobby, but we do not have open comment right now from the public, and this is a board discussion. If you've got other material like to share, I'd ask you to forward to all board members.
I'll just respond Mr. Chair, that the Plan 2040 in Chapter 4 has a specific section for providing affordable housing. I think it is the Planning Commission's job to do that work. That is their plan that they put together. And you may be right, but I worry about every tough decision rolling down to this committee. We should certainly want to advocate for it, but this isn't the first time we're getting a decision handed to us that I think we certainly have opinions on, but I'm not sure it's our space to make some of those decisions.
Any other comments on this issue? Seeing none, let's move on to the next agenda item. Review the September 2020 retreat agenda. Diane?
Ron, quick, did we have a motion and a second that we needed to vote on there? I think we did.
Did we have a formal motion? Okay. All right. Can we get a restatement of the motion, Diane?
I'm not sure. Brad might be able to help me. Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Brad, do you happen to have a note of that?
I just have noted down that it was Thomas that made the motion and Shannon seconded it. I'd have to go back and review the video to get it word for word.
And I believe that, I don't think it needs to be word for word. I think that what we said was that we would direct to whoever we're going to direct this to, that as they review plans, they be cognizant and aware of reducing the cost of new construction in our community.
Does the second concur with that?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll do a roll call vote of the board. Shannon Oury? In support of the motion or opposition to the motion? Shannon was a yes. Edith?
Yes.
Patrick Kelly?
Yes.
Christina Gentry?
Yes.
Rebecca Buford?
Yes.
Sarah Waters?
Yes.
Erica Zimmerman?
Yes.
Dana Ortiz?
Yes.
Thomas Howe?
Yes.
Monte Soukup?
Yes.
Paul Newsom?
Yes.
Cole Brown?
Yes.
And Ron Gaches, yes. Motion passes 13-0. Item 2, review the September 2020 retreat agenda. Diane?
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this draft that you have in your packet for the September 14th meeting has you starting at your regular 11 o'clock time. The first, about the first hour or so, we have passed on the invitation on your behalf to the City Commission to join with the board, and understand that if not all of them, the vast majority of the commissioners are planning to do that. We were thinking probably about that first hour, and then it would flow into your regular, some of your regular meeting items, monthly meeting items that you would need to take care of. We also then would flow into the retreat items, and you can see we have 2 of those listed here for you. Discuss whether to recommend an allocation of funds to certain goals in contrast to the current allocation process. And then another major discussion about the application process with the GARE toolkit. So that's the draft that we have for you. We're really interested in understanding if that captures the agenda items that the board is wanting to discuss in September. And then further, I would suggest if there's any other comments about materials or things like that that you all would like to have in anticipation of that meeting, that would also be helpful direction to us.
Mr. Chairman, this is Cole.
Thank you. Comments from board members?
Mr. Chairman, this is Cole. I won't be able to attend that meeting. I have to go into the doctor, have my legs worked on again. So my legs have not been progressing right. So they have...
Thank you, Cole. We will miss you.
Thank you. So they have to do what you call a sclerotherapy. So my veins have not been working right. So when I had my legs worked on in the beginning, I had laser procedures, and then my calf popped, and then had to be getting injections, but then this has not been working right, so we've been trying to find ways to get my legs better again.
Thank you, Cole. Best wishes with that therapy.
Thank
other
you.
Questions or comments regarding the agenda for September meeting?
And if you would like to...
Shannon Oury with the Housing Authority. I have a question about, I have lost track on where we are with our toolkit and whether there is still outstanding work that we need to do with our toolkit.
Great question. I think it would be, the toolkit included a number of potential policy recommendations that we could consider that we have not investigated very deeply. Would there be interest in reviewing the toolkit for opportunities for policy activity in, say, that over the course of the next 12 to 18 months? I see some heads shaking up and down. Yes, thumbs up. Diane, let's include that as an agenda item.
Ron, it's Monte, Soukup
Yes,
Justice Matters. I believe when we worked on the toolkit, we did an exercise where we identified maybe the top 5 or 6. So maybe we could, instead of, maybe take a cursory look, everybody look at the toolkit before they come to the retreat. And if there's something you want to raise up, let's raise it up, but let's not spend time reviewing the whole time. Let's concentrate on the items we've already identified as important and worthy of our effort.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. We might be able just to bring those items back to you. I think that might have been done in the January meeting that you had. So we could revisit that and kind of have that be part of the September report.
Yes. Okay. Very good.
Mr. Chairman, this is Cole, and I would be very supportive of a toolkit that we can put together for other people around the community so they can have and learn about it. Because I think a toolkit is very useful. And if you like to give me a call, sometime we can do lunch or dinner together.
Cole, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has actually created a toolkit that's pretty comprehensive. And I'll make sure that you get sent a link that will take you to that so you can review that document. Diane, can we get that done for Cole? All right, thank you very much. Dana? Yes, ma'am.
I think Dana Ortiz, Family Promise of Lawrence. I kind of concur with Shannon, and I think that since this pandemic has shown us how greatly broken many pieces of our society is in many ways, that with a review of the toolkit and our current situation under the pandemic might not be a bad idea. Not to reinvent it, but are there things in there that are missing because of what we've learned through this last several months? Which I'm sure the answer is probably yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good suggestion. Other comments from board members about the draft agenda for September? Seeing none, Diane, you and I will work to conclude that and wrap that up in the next week or so, okay? Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is number 3, discussion about the gap between how the Affordable Housing Advisory Board policies, processes, and grant decisions align with the city's social justice goals and ways to close the gap between where we are and where we want to be. I did not have an opportunity to review this issue with everyone on the board, and if I didn't get to you, I apologize, but I did reach out to several members of the board following a very good question that I got from Diane in preparation for this meeting. She noted that during our July meeting, we indicated to staff that we would like to look at the gap as it applies to our affordable housing work between where we are and where maybe we should be in regards to racial and social equity issues. And each person I spoke with had a little bit different turn on what that meant to them. And I don't want to presume to know what the majority of this board would like to discuss in this area. My own priority is for us to try to apply the new emphasis on racial and social equity issues to the grant cycle that we're about to go through this fall, so that we can better inform those decisions. I know that's not the only work that we need to do or should be doing in the racial and social equity space, but I'm very cognizant of the fact that we only have really this meeting and the September meeting to finalize any changes that we would want to ask staff to make to those grant solicitation documents. So I think all of you have had a chance to review the email exchange that I had with Diane at the beginning of the month. I would, so you kind of know where I'm at on some of these issues broadly, and I would defer then to the rest of the board to help lead the discussion on this issue. Who would like to comment or make a recommendation?
Crickets. So I think these are, you have come up with a good memo there. I think that it makes sense for us to cover these things, to talk about those gaps. I think this is a part of our remit that's important for us to be dealing with. I don't know that I am qualified to, just because of, I bluntly put, I come from a position of privilege, and I'm just not in that same, I don't have the same awareness of that gap that others might. I own that. But I think it's definitely something that we should be talking about.
This is Monte, Soukup Justice Matters. I think Dana brought up a good point. I'd look at item number 1 there, and we've talked about, and I probably, as a Justice Matters person, been a proponent of capital projects, because I think that's what, our Justice Matters support of the campaign to get the tax approved and all that was a lot based on that. But we live in a much different world today than we did, 3 or 4 years ago. And I certainly, being on this board and being associated with the particular service providers in affordable housing has changed my view. And I'm trying to take that back to Justice Matters as well. So I think, certainly a conversation about how the funds are allocated, and I think a conversation about whether or not we want to intentionally try to steer our proposals that we get certain directions based on how we put out the RFP. We've kind of done an all call in the past. And I think if we want to target certain things, we can certainly try to create the request for proposals in a more targeted fashion so that we do get the kind of proposals that we want to have an impact on areas where we want to have impact. So I think that's certainly a discussion we need to spend some time on.
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a good goal. We need to start going forward and talking with more people about it. So with restaurants opening up, maybe me and you can talk about it over lunch or dinner.
Yes, Dana.
So I concur with the memo that you wrote and the points, and I just wanted to put a bit of a face on this. Just in the hour and 26 minutes that we've been talking, 4 different households have called Family Promise in need of services. So this is an urgent issue, and I think adjusting right now is critical for this board, and I think to do otherwise is kind of tone deaf to how serious the situation is facing our community.
Thank you, Dana. Other comments?
Erica Zimmerman, Habitat for Humanity. I agree with Dana. I think an adjustment is needed. And I also just had a question. I would be interested in hearing, Mr. Chair, is it these top 2 you just pulled out because you heard it numerous times, or is that just the top 2 that you pulled out because they're important? I would also be interested into hearing about some of the other gaps and maybe that we can start to look at and work on too. But I agree that making an adjustment in this time is necessary.
The items Ron Gaches, AHAB Chair, and thank you for the question. The items I mentioned in my email to Diane, at the time I wrote that email, it was not intended for circulation. Diane and I were having a conversation, and she'd asked me about, what do you think the board intended when they said they'd like to study the gap? And responses varied quite a bit, including looking at, maybe taking a fresh look at just what is our housing gap, because our data now is 4 or 5 years old or something like that. So responses were pretty broad. I selected those as examples, not because they were mentioned most frequently, but only because I thought they were interesting policy issues that arose out of looking at our work through a new equity lens, or with a greater emphasis on equity. It's the only reason I used those. And I chose not to identify the people that raised those issues. But I heard several other comments from folks as well, and I would rather not put those into my words, but encourage folks to comment themselves on what they think we should be doing or how we should be in better informing our decision making to be fully consistent with our community's racial and social equity goals.
This is Christina Gentry, resident receiving and has been receiving assistance housing. I suggest that we read and look at a report that was written called Housing Policy and Residential Segregation, What Happened in Lawrence. I received that from Watkins Museum. They have that on file. It's a pretty interesting, not so recent report, but it's a report that talks about what we're talking about. I have a quote from that. One of the quotes is, many Americans assume since the passage of civil rights and fair housing legislation, individuals have been able to choose where they live. Therefore, individuals and their choices determine residential patterns. And if residential segregation still exists, it is a voluntary occurrence. So that's just part of that report, and it speaks just about Lawrence. I think that's important. Maybe we can look at that and study that.
Christina, what's the date on that report? Is that something relatively new, or is it
Sorry, this is Christina Gentry. No. Well, I got it from the Watkins Museum from Monica Davis. She pulled that out. Monica Davis is wonderful. I believe the date on that was 1972, because it had information that was relative to something that happened. It gave quotes and it gave information. And I know Lawrence doesn't like to think that we are segregated or we had redlining, but some of the points and ideas and the actual quotes and the things in this report speak differently.
Chairman?
So this is Shannon Lowry, and Danny and Brad can kind of help me with remembering, but a couple of years ago we had to do an affirmative a fair housing assessment. We got some data. We should get some additional data once this census is done, but and that data allowed us to see sort of where different demographic, where folks were living and sort of what parts of town and that type of thing. And so we could certainly extract that data for the board's education about kind of Christina's point, which is how much has it changed since 1970, where people of color and just different demographics are living.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Thomas.
Thomas Howe, Lawrence Board of Realtors representative. I think that what Christina brings up would be of extremely high value in getting a background and really a ground zero, or not a ground zero, but a 1972 perspective, and then extrapolating from that. Is there a potential that this board could, or somebody, whether it comes from the city, could provide us with copies of that?
This is Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I'd be happy to do that. Additionally, the Human Relations Commission a couple of years ago put together some very interesting information about Lawrence and segregation in Lawrence, and I would be happy to pass on that information. I believe that information, as I had looked at it and kind of reminded myself about it, there was an NAACP survey from 1964 and a map that was in fact created about some of the segregated areas in Lawrence, and I'd be happy to put that together along with the information that Ms. Gentry has mentioned that came from the Watkins.
That'd be great. I think that any of this information, any of this background, any of this kind of foundational reports about what our city has done, because many of those things are not likely to have changed. And I think that if we have an understanding of that, if we can get it a couple of weeks before our retreat and not just read it, but as Christina says, study it and pay close attention to it, that would help inform our decisions and inform that retreat. I think that'd be really of high value.
I concur, Thomas and Christina. I think that's Great idea to include that in our materials and also as an agenda item for discussion.
Rebecca Buford with Tenants to Homeowners. Yes, I can't agree more with that. We all can use that background information, but I don't want us to lose and continue. We need to go miles and miles further in our current policies and procedures, absolutely. But I also, a lot of this discussion, sometimes we don't hear that, to me, that the social justice and anti-poverty work. So when Dana talks about right now, the people that are struggling and losing their housing through COVID are unfortunately disproportionately people of color because of economic and poverty issues that have historically and continue to be a problem. But if we are moving our money to serve those that are being impacted by COVID, we are distinctly serving those that are unfairly impacted. So, the two little houses that trust fund helped build, and we built smaller houses, and the public policy that is allowing us to build two houses on a lot, which the neighborhood disagreed with. Those two homeowners I just sold those two little houses to are people of color, women owners that are people of color. So the work that we're doing right now, I guess we need to learn more. We need to keep focusing on changing public policy, but I feel like a lot of the things this board is suggesting is doing just that, and I don't want to lose that momentum either. So I feel like if we continue to create bricks and mortar houses that are affordable to all people, in all neighborhoods. So like our discussion on being able to do two houses on one lot allows us to get into West neighborhoods so that we can move people of color into home ownership positions or rental positions. Shannon's support of vouchers moves people of color into all neighborhoods. I feel like, I don't know, I just want to continue to push that work, but not lose the fact that we're not doing that now, and we don't have a lot of really good tools. We just need the financial support of those. And so again, it's a subsidy question, and continue to adjust policy. I'm not saying that policy is where we want it at, but a lot of our affordable housing policy to move people into other neighborhoods is doing just that. And we're seeing, if we can focus on those changes or continue that movement. Again, learning more about the past is not stopping that. And I believe it only pushes us further and helps us with that. But we're also talking right now with funding support for this money, how do we make sure that money goes to the people of color who are struggling with COVID and potentially being evicted? How do we make sure we're doing an RFP for that?
And this is Shannon, and I support what Rebecca was saying. And I would also like us, as we talk about how we do the next funding round and that application, to think about requiring anybody we fund to give us non-individual identifying demographic information every year, that they have to file a report or do something like that. Because right now, we don't really know that information about the things we've already funded. Rebecca is giving us that information, but we don't really know. It's information that we can get voluntarily from our participants. And so I can give you pretty good information about the vouchers that have been funded. But I do think we want to be tracking that, and that should be something we put in our next application, is that we want to report on that.
This is Edith, and I want to join that. I think what we haven't done is a piece of intentionality around this. The fact that it has happened has been great, but we have not been intentionally focused on this. and asking and putting it in our application and naming that that is a priority for us. Not only in numbers, but in asking people who are applying for this money, what are you doing to assure that your staff is conscious of this? What kind of implicit bias training are you doing so that you are making sure that your staff is not unintentionally screening people out? So that kind of intentionality in our process, that people are clear that this is a priority for us. I don't think we just honed in that this is an intentional piece for us in our policies. And finding the balance. I understand that right now we really cannot be tone deaf on COVID-19, but not losing the priority that long-term housing is still a priority for us. To find where we find the balance, because like I have been biased to get services. I know I have, because I too have wanted the brick and mortar. Let's help people buy houses and be in long-term housing. So how do we find that balance between the two? And I've talked a lot because I have to go. I have a doctor's appointment. So, but I'm looking forward to this conversation.
You know,
Very much.
Mr. Chairman, this is Cole. I hear what you guys are saying. I've seen black and white, and just us are not in favor of COVID-19. And I've seen people struggling with employment and losing their houses. But I've seen like houses being developed here in Lawrence that are smaller instead of bigger houses. So I guess what we could do is like teach them. I know that's not where you want to live the rest of your life, but at least they're developing smaller houses on the East Hills and towards my neighborhood. Because if you lose your house, we can help you with Section 8, and I'm on Section 8 too.
Thank you, Cole.
Mr. Chair, this is Patrick, Douglas County Commission. I really appreciate Edith's comment about intentionality, and I know some of you filled out the equity access report as part of your Douglas County CARES Act, and I don't know, I'm not saying it's a perfect tool, but it was one of the first times I can ever remember that we had a tool for addressing equity in a proposal. And so I'll just throw that out there as something we could at least look at and see if that would help influence. I'm with Rebecca as well. I think a lot of the work that this group is doing is addressing some of those disparities, but I also think we need an intentionality that we are addressing those disparities, and here's how we're doing it.
Thank you, Patrick.
Rebecca Buver, tenants to homeowners. We did fill that equity form out, and I thought that was a really good one. It was short and sweet and to the point, but it was intentional and made you think about those things and go through that. It was a good balance of not too much, in a time where we're all struggling in the trenches to provide services, but we're still intentionally thinking about these things as our programs progress. So I would suggest that tool as a good start with this RFP.
I agree with you on that.
Diane, could you obtain from the county, or perhaps you already have a copy of that tool and distribute it in advance so we could look at possibly considering that as part of our proposal packet?
Yes.
Am I correct? We need to make final approval at our September meeting for the contents of that proposal packet? And or do we have, because that goes out before our October meeting, doesn't it?
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I'm going to ask if Danny and Brad might be able to help refresh my memory about the timing that we've talked about and when that RFP would need to be finalized to make our calendar. Do you all know that right off?
We had some discuss. This is Brad Carr, Community Development. We had some discussion about the timing of that, and a lot of the discussion was around how much funds are going to be available. So obviously, the later that it's put out, more funds have built up from the sales tax. But I don't know if Danielle remembers. We kind of discussed maybe how much the board would be looking at having to work with based on the projections that have obviously have come in lower than what we were thinking.
This is Ron Gaches, AHAB Chair. Diane, do you happen to know off the top of your head, do we also get the earmarked portion of use taxes or only of sales taxes?
I can jump in. This is Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. It's both sales and use tax.
Okay, thank you. Because I know one's going down precipitously, but the use tax number has been going up as a partial offset. Okay, so we do. All right, thank you. Very good discussion. Other comments? Other requests of staff? Any other discussion on item 3 at this time? Seeing none, we'll move to agenda item D, quick updates and 2020 homeless point in time count statistics.
Yeah, this is Danny Walters with Community Development. This was just something that was requested at the last meeting, so we've just provided it to you in the form of a quick update.
I have a question about the point in time statistics. As soon as I can find my page. Oh, I have floated around too many documents here. Oh, I think I'm getting close. Yes, here we go. I'm looking at the chart, right? The pie chart on the left-hand side. And we talk about unsheltered, emergency shelter, and transitional housing statistics. And then underneath that are additional homeless population. And my question is, that additional homeless population, are those incremental additional adults, or do they represent component parts of the 408?
Those represent just folks that when they filled out the survey had indicated if they had concerns with any of these. So typically for families, it's just going to be a head of household. No youth are involved in answering those questions.
Okay, so that's not incremental homeless folks. Those are component parts of the 408. Those are responses that came. Okay, thank you very much.
And I have a question as well. I note that this point in time was in January, and we had this little thing happen in March, which may have significantly shifted those numbers. When is the next report, a point in time that we'll look at this kind of information? Because I think that January was substantially different than April, May, June, July. I would love to know what our current trends are, what are current related to the point in time of being January as opposed to being now.
The point in time is administered by the Kansas Statewide Homeless Coalition on a regional basis, and HUD requires this count be done every January. So the next scheduled count would be January of 2021.
Thank you.
Another critical component to remember about point in time count is anybody who's doubled up is not counted. And so this underestimates the number of homeless that are maybe couch surfing or doubling up with other people. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're safely sheltered. And that's kind of really critical to remember when you're always looking at point-in-time data. It's a very narrow definition of homelessness.
Dana, this is Rebecca with Tenants to Homeowners, would you mind sharing the stats for HSC that we have seen? Because I think that's probably our best kind of look at what's happened in the last few months in Lawrence.
Yeah, sure. Dana Ortiz. I keep forgetting to say where I'm from. Family Promise of Lawrence. So we have a housing stabilization collaborative that was initiated shortly after COVID started, Thomas, between Tenants to Homeowners and Family Promise of Lawrence. So we've served Tenants to Homeowners serves those who don't have children, and they've served 17 families with 10 plus applications in process. And Family Promise has served 54 families through that program only. But we've got 70 families enrolled in active programming right now. So we're definitely serving about 70% more households, more family households in Family Promise than we were in February, Thomas. 70%.
Thank you.
Dana, while you're up, I've got a question for you. The funding that AHAB made available to plug the gap on the voucher grant that was lost by Salvation Army unexpectedly, how did that transition go? Did all those folks,
that would be a Shannon Hourly question.
Excuse me.
That's all right.
So there were originally 13 families that came in through that. We paid August rent on 12. We have one family that the individual went missing. But we have 12 families and the first payments have been made.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions regarding the quick update on the homeless point in time count? Seeing none, do we have any other new business? Seeing none, we'll go to calendar review. September 14th is our regularly scheduled meeting at 11 o'clock, followed by our retreat at 1. And we will continue with our schedule the second Monday in the month through October, November, and December.
Mr. Chairman, I got a question for you.
Yes.
Would you like to do dinner or lunch sometime?
Cole, I would like very much to get together one-on-one. I am not able to do an in-person meeting right now because I'm an active cancer patient. So I've been taking the social distancing requirements very seriously. But I would be pleased to do a one-on-one phone call with you, or I don't know if you ever do FaceTime on a computer or something, but...
No, I don't.
Pardon me?
No, I don't.
Okay. But, well, we can do a phone call and discuss some of the issues in greater detail. Would that be a good place to start?
That'd be fine.
Very good. I'll contact you this week, and we'll try and get something set up where we can spend some time together.
All righty.
All right. Thank you very much, Cole.
This is Danny Walters, the Community Development Division. We do have Wheatland performance agreement on the schedule for October. Our hope is that we'll actually be able to bring that to you in September. So.
All right, thank you.
We're in the midst of the last meetings about it.
Okay. Anything else to come before the board today? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much for excellent discussion.